Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Tuesday, January the 20th. And welcome to our commentary. Well, I have a post over at the American Thinker today talking about this incident in Minneapolis when some people broke into a church or they walked into a church and they started interrupting the service or the mass. I'm not sure what denomination it was, but it doesn't matter. And they broke in and they were, interfering with the lives and the privacy of people inside that church. And I just thought that that was completely wrong to do that. Now, I'm not going to get into all the legalities of it because some of it is frankly confusing to me. I would think that a church, at the very least, would be private property. So you're trespassing, I suppose, if you go in without permission. So they could be charged for trespassing. I think that could be one of the consequences. But just as, from the standpoint of reaching people, I mean, if the objective of this group was to change the hearts and minds of the people in that church, I don't think you do that by breaking into a service like this or a mass. That's not how you do it. There are other ways of, as I say, reaching people. Perhaps you can speak directly with the pastor or the priest and say, look, we're troubled by this and we like to talk to you about it. But you don't break into the middle of a service or a mass. I just think that's completely wrong. And I understand that there may be some legal consequences here. I'm not exactly sure exactly what it all is, but it doesn't matter. They shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do this. You just shouldn't do something like this. I mean, if you want to reach people, you don't want to make them angry. It's like the people who are blocking traffic. I mean, do all of these people blocking traffic or breaking into a museum and destroying a work of art? I mean, do these people think they're gaining hearts and minds when they do that? No, it's the exact opposite. So I have no idea who broke in or what this group was. I understand one of the people in the group was a well-known activist in the area. I don't know his name. And the one person who was recording the events was the one and only Don Lemon, who used to be at CNN. You would probably remember him from CNN days. And, his show kind of failed. It didn't do real well over there. And I don't know what he's doing now. I guess he's running around doing things on his own, which is fine. A lot of people are doing that, including myself. But I just, again, I go back to the basic point. This is not how you do it. If your objective is to reach hearts and minds, if your objective is to change people or persuade people, this is not the way to do it. You don't break into a service or a mass, and you certainly don't block traffic. That's not a good way to reach people. You don't block traffic, as we've seen some of these climate change activists do. They sit there and they block a bridge or they block traffic, and they think this is helping their cause. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they got to change strategy to say the least. Well, yesterday we had a conversation with my friend Dr. Carlos Eire. Carlos is a professor of history, and actually he teaches not current history. He teaches old history, if I could put it that way, 14th century, 1500, 15th century type history. Very interesting fellow. He came from Cuba just like I did. We're sort of contemporaries age-wise. And he left Cuba and he wrote that wonderful book, Waiting for Snow in Havana. Became a bestseller and very celebrated book for Carlos. Well, we spoke yesterday because I wanted to get his feedback. I wanted to get his thoughts on what kind of a transition could you see in Cuba? What kind of a transition could you see? I mean, I think we can all agree that change is coming. I mean, they obviously, they're really out of options now. I mean, there's no way they can survive unless they make some drastic changes, either changing the government or changing their economic strategy. But changing the government is going to be a little bit more complicated than they think, because I think that if they plan to work with President Trump, he's going to be demanding some economic and human rights changes as well. But anyway, we talked a little bit about what could happen, and Carlos reminded us that back in 1998, when you had the Spanish-American War, Cuba was a U.S. territory for 4 years. And then after that, it became an independent country. And then, obviously, the first half of the 20th century was primarily the years of the Republic of Cuba. And during that time, Cuba achieved some incredible prosperity for a young country. And one of the things that he talked to us about, and we had talked about that before, and that is the number of immigrants, roughly 1 million immigrants who moved to Cuba, most of them from Europe, many of them from Spain, including my late grandfather. And they moved to Cuba, and one of the reasons they moved to Cuba was because it was a good place to do business. There was a good economy. There was an atmosphere that was welcoming, especially to immigrants from Spain. Though even though there had been an independence war, there was never really any hatred of Spain. In fact, Cuba and Spain have always had a great relationship. So we talked a little bit about what could happen. And I think that's a potential scenario for the United States to participate in a transition to a new Cuban republic. I would certainly hope so, because I think the United States can bring the economic, the money, to be blunt about it, the money, the investment, and also the political security that will attract investors into a new Cuba. And then you have, of course, in the United States, 1.5 million Cuban immigrants like me, Cuban Americans like me, who've grown up in the United States. But obviously, we still want to see Cuba do well, even though we're not going to go back to live. Nevertheless, we want Cuba to do well. We want a Cuba in this century to be different than the Cuba, obviously, of the communist era. So interesting conversation. We're going to try to keep up with him more as these events unfold, because there's a lot of things that are going to happen in Cuba, I think, between now and the end of the year. And, I think we just got to keep an eye on it. But change is coming to Cuba, to say the least, and it's about time. What can I say? I have a post coming out Wednesday morning talking about this insanity in California, where they're going to do something called the wealth tax. So they're going to tax wealthy people. I guess they're going to tax you for making money. I don't know. They're already taxing you like crazy, but I guess they're going to tax you more. And the idea is that they want you to pay back the opportunities and the money you made. Well, that's not going over real well with the millionaires and the billionaires who are planning to leave, and that's what my post is about. I think a lot of these people are saying we got to get out of this place because this is not where we want to be, and many are moving to Texas and Florida and other states because they don't want to be paying a wealth tax. I would hope that somebody in the California legislature comes to his or her senses and realizes how damaging this kind of thing is. When you go after people who produce, when you go after the people who create wealth, that's not the way to grow your economy. That's not the way to create prosperity. You should be doing the exact opposite. You should be making California more attractive to invest, more attractive to millionaires and billionaires who want to invest their money in your state. And I think a lot of the billionaires and the millionaires, they see this tax, as wealth tax or whatever, more as a form of punishment, almost like saying, we're going to punish you for having made a lot of money. Well, again, that's not a very effective way of doing it. What they ought to do is say, hey, keep on making more money. We're going to make it easier for you to make more, because we enjoy having millionaires and billionaires starting companies and starting enterprises and creating jobs. That's what they do. That's what these millionaires do. Most of them are self-made. Now, there are some people who inherited their wealth. I know that. But a lot of these people are self-made. I mean, they made their own fortunes. And you want more people like that in your state. You want to attract more people like that to your state. So we'll see how this develops. But I think California is making a huge mistake with the wealth tax. Hopefully, they'll come to their senses before it's not too late. Well, January the 20th, this is the day that we've been inaugurating presidents, I guess, since 1945 was the first time we did it. That was Franklin Roosevelt, of course, being sworn in for the fourth time with Harry Truman as vice president. And, we remember this day because something is always interesting about who gets inaugurated. And I have a few memories I want to share with you, are the ones that I remember. Reagan in 1981, because that was such a revolutionary thing. I mean, that was such a change to have Ronald Reagan elected and carry the country and the landslide that he had. Just a lot of fun. I remember a lot of excitement about that inauguration. Bush 43, that would have been 2001. And that's because the election had been so controversial, all kinds of talks about this and this and this and that, and things finally settled down when the Electoral College or the Senate approved the Electoral College numbers. And then a couple of weeks later, Bush became president. And I think that, we needed a little rest after those 2 or 3 months of controversy. Obama in 2009, I didn't vote for him, but nevertheless, you have to at least appreciate the fact that he was the first Black American, African American elected. And so that was pretty historic right there as being the first African American. And then in 2025, just a year ago, President Trump, the fact that he was able to come back in what has to be one of the most amazing political comebacks in American history. And he was able to come back and win the presidency, not just by a little bit, but he did fairly well. And he won the popular vote by a couple million or 3 million. And then he won most of the states. So I thought it was a pretty significant victory. Also picked up more seats in the Senate. So that was a pretty amazing victory by Donald Trump in 2024 that led to his inauguration in 2025, exactly a year ago. So a couple of memories from January the 20th. Reagan, 1981, Bush, 2001, Obama, 2009, because of the historic nature of it. And then, of course, Donald Trump in 25 because of the comeback that no one had seen before. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.